The kingdom of Solara stretched across the horizon like a painting bathed in gold. Each day as the sun began its slow descent, the skies ignited in brilliant hues of amber, crimson and molten gold, casting the palace in a divine glow. The people often said that the land itself was blessed, that the sunsets whispered blessings to the citizens, and that every blade of grass seemed to shimmer under the sun's departing light. The kingdom was prosperous, filled with bustling marketplaces, towering spires of marble, and courtyards where fountains sang in crystal-clear notes. Solara was a kingdom proud of its heritage, its rulers, and the warmth that flowed not only from its sun but from the hearts of its citizens. Among them, no figure shone brighter than Princess Seraphine. Seraphine was unlike any royal who had graced Solara in living memory. She moved with a gentle elegance, her every step seeming to harmonize with the rhythm of the land itself. People from the humblest cottages to the highest towers admired her wisdom. She spoke to merchants, soldiers and scholars alike, listening with patience, offering counsel where needed, and bringing solutions that were both clever and compassionate. Her laughter was rare, but when it came, it sparkled like morning dew on golden leaves. Her compassion extended to the weak and the poor. She healed the sick with the advice of physicians, and her words comforted the grieving with soft-spoken encouragement, and resolved disputes among neighbors with fairness that even the judges of the kingdom envied. Her beauty was radiant but unpretentious. Golden hair fell in waves down her back, catching the sun so that it seemed lit from within. Her eyes, a deep chestnut flecked with amber, held both curiosity and kindness, reflecting a mind alive with thought yet softened by empathy. Children adored her, following her through the palace gardens, asking questions and receiving answers that spoke to their hearts. Even the palace guards, who were sworn to discipline and vigilance, softened when she approached, offering bows and smiles rather than strict formality. Seraphine's presence illuminated the kingdom in a way that no artist could capture and no poet could fully describe. She was, in every sense, the living embodiment of Solara's warmth and grace. Yet even as the kingdom basked in the light of their beloved princess, shadows lingered within the golden halls. Lady Morwen, the new queen and Seraphine's stepmother, was a striking woman, her beauty sharp and perfect like polished onyx. Yet behind her delicate features and flowing robes lurked an ambition that consumed every sense of morality. Where Seraphine radiated warmth, Morwen's presence chilled the air. Her smiles were measured, her words precise, but every act was carefully designed to assert dominance and manipulate perception. She was beautiful enough to command attention, charming enough to sway the courtiers, but beneath her allure lay a mind sharpened for power, unrelenting and ruthless. Morwen had long envied Seraphine's favor with the king and adoration among the people. Every compliment that fell upon the young princess was a sting to Morwen, every act of kindness noted and resented. As Seraphine spent her days among the people and her nights in the quiet halls of the palace, Morwen's envy festered like a wound. She watched the laughter shared between father and daughter, the way the king's eyes lit with pride and love when speaking of Seraphine's clever solutions to the kingdom's challenges. Each gesture, each shared smile, was like fuel to Morwen's simmering wrath. She began to plot, weaving schemes in the shadows, quietly gathering allies among those susceptible to flattery or fear. In her mind, the kingdom could be hers, but only if Seraphine were removed, silenced forever so that no rival would cast a shadow on her own power. Yet the kingdom itself seemed to sense that all was not well. The palace, ancient and wrought with intricate designs that mirrored the sun's movement, seemed to hold its breath at times. The walls, thick with the stories of generations, whispered faintly to those who cared to listen. Some servants spoke of a subtle shift in the light when Morwen passed, of shadows lengthening unnaturally, or doors creaking open as if by unseen hands. These were dismissed as the imagination of those wary of the queen's moods, yet an instinct, deep and old as the land, hinted that the palace remembered every act of cruelty, every injustice committed within its walls. As the sun dipped lower on the horizon each day, bathing Solara in its molten glow, a sense of foreshadowing hung over the land like a silent mist. The golden light kissed the towers and the gardens, yet beneath the brilliance, a darker energy stirred. It was as if the very air sensed that the fire of human jealousy, once ignited, could not destroy the purity of the princess. The people remained oblivious to the impending tragedy, laughing and working under the setting sun, unaware that a storm of shadows was preparing to rise. For fire, though it could consume flesh and timber, could not touch the essence of Seraphine. The land itself seemed to hum with a quiet promise, that the princess's spirit, when tested by flames, would awaken something far more powerful and vengeful than even Morwen could imagine. And so the kingdom of Solara shone, radiant as ever, yet beneath the gilded walls and golden spires, envy and ambition brewed in silence. The golden sunsets, though beautiful, were no longer just a symbol of warmth and prosperity. They had become the stage for a tale of betrayal, power, and awakening. Seraphine moved through her days like sunlight itself, while Lady Morwen plodded in the shadows, each step calculated and deliberate. And the palace, ancient and sentient, watched, holding the memories of generations and preparing for the reckoning that would inevitably come, ensuring that no injustice would be forgotten and that fire, though cruel, would be but the beginning of a story written in shadows and light. The golden skies of Solara dimmed slightly that evening, casting longer, redder shadows across the palace terraces. The courtiers went about their routines, bowing to Lady Morwen with careful reverence, yet even their smiles faltered when a chill wind whispered down the corridors. It was as though the kingdom itself exhaled, aware that the wheel of fate was turning. In the center of it all, Seraphine remained unbowed, her gaze steadfast, her heart filled with both compassion and unyielding strength. The people's love for her shone brighter than the envy that sought to smother it, and the stage was set. When the fire eventually came, it would not destroy her. It would awaken a force as eternal as the night, demanding justice, demanding recognition, and demanding that the rightful heir claim her place, no matter the darkness that opposed her. The corridors of the palace, so long filled with sunlight and laughter, began to carry a different weight, a subtle tension that only those attentive could feel. Lady Morwen, the queen whose beauty was as flawless as her ambition, moved through these halls with calculated grace. Behind her composed smile, a storm brewed, a storm born of envy, ambition, and the relentless desire for power. Each step she took was deliberate, measured, designed to manipulate every gaze and every thought of those around her. The people might have seen only elegance and poise, but the palace walls seemed to shiver under the weight of her schemes, echoing the silent malice in her heart. Lady Morwen's envy of Seraphine had grown unchecked. The princess's charm, intelligence, and the warmth with which she touched everyone's lives were impossible to overlook. Every court gathering, every ceremony, every informal interaction served as a reminder of the affection Seraphine commanded, a constant, glaring spotlight highlighting Morwen's own inadequacies and insecurities. Where Seraphine's words healed and soothed, Morwen's presence incited fear and hesitation. She realized that her only path to power was through elimination, the complete removal of Seraphine, the daughter whose very existence threatened to eclipse her own. The queen's strategy began with manipulation of the king. The old ruler, though loving, was not immune to the careful planting of doubt. Morwen's voice was honeyed, her words persuasive, whispered during quiet moments in the throne room, during walks through the palace gardens and in the solitude of the royal chambers. "Father," she would say softly, "our daughter's brilliance shines too brightly. She may seem kind and gentle, yet even the brightest flame can burn the foundations of a kingdom if not tempered." The king, a man of reason and affection, found himself unconsciously questioning every misstep or accident that seemed to accompany Seraphine. Was it mere coincidence, or had his daughter inadvertently caused these small calamities? Morwen's insinuations were subtle, framing concerns as counsel and warnings as protection, and the king's worry, though faint, began to take root. Meanwhile, the palace itself seemed to sense the growing darkness. Servants whispered among themselves, noticing changes too subtle to name. Birds that once nested in the palace gardens fled abruptly, scattering in panic without apparent reason. Shadows along the corridors began to stretch unnaturally, bending and twisting as though to observe the movements of those passing by. The wind, gentle and comforting in days past, now carried faint, almost imperceptible cries that seemed to echo from nowhere. Some servants claimed they heard Seraphine's name whispered by the gusts, as though the very air was aware of the danger that loomed over her. Yet these signs, while alarming, were dismissed by most as the palace settling or the result of nervous imaginations. Only a few trusted their instincts enough to remain vigilant, sensing that the princess's life was imperiled by forces unseen. Lady Morwen's plotting extended beyond mere words. She began to gather allies among the courtiers, those susceptible to flattery, fear, or personal ambition. Whispered promises, subtle threats, and carefully timed rewards ensured their compliance. Each minor courtier became a pawn, each loyal guard subtly swayed by suggestions that Seraphine's presence, though outwardly harmless, might eventually disrupt the delicate balance of power. Morwen painted a narrative in which the princess, however innocent, would one day endanger the very kingdom she was born to protect. By the time Seraphine herself sensed the first shiver of danger, the web of deceit was already far too intricate to unravel with mere words. As the queen's influence grew, Seraphine remained largely unaware of the shadow spreading over her life. She continued to engage with the people, offering guidance, wisdom, and compassion. Children laughed in her presence, the elderly sought her counsel, and the common folk revered her as a beacon of hope and benevolence. Yet, while she gave light to others, darkness began to creep around her in the palace halls. Portraits on the walls, previously cheerful and full of warmth, now seemed to glare in judgment. The chandeliers above flickered when Morwen passed by, casting distorted shapes on polished floors. Even the mirrors, once reflecting only reality, seemed to capture more than mere appearances, hinting at the dangerous undercurrents that Lady Morwen was unleashing. The queen's manipulations reached their zenith when she convinced the king to hold private audiences regarding Seraphine's threats. Each conversation, draped in worry and paternal concern, was orchestrated to deepen doubt. Lady Morwen spoke of misinterpreted omens, of portents that the princess could unwittingly ignite conflicts, of whispers from foreign dignitaries who supposedly questioned the wisdom of her involvement in governance. Every assertion, though entirely fabricated, was made with an air of irrefutable authority. By now, the king's admiration for his daughter remained, yet a seed of uncertainty had been planted, a seed that would grow into fear if not addressed. Meanwhile, the palace itself seemed to respond to the encroaching malice. The great halls, adorned with gold leaf and intricate carvings, groaned as though in protest. Curtains twitched, chandeliers swayed, and the faintest rustle of footsteps could be heard in empty corridors. Birds roosting near the windows scattered at impossible hours, and shadows lengthened to impossible proportions, stretching across walls and ceilings. Even the wind whispered warnings, carrying Seraphine's name in mournful tones. Few noticed these phenomena, and fewer understood their meaning, yet they were all harbingers of a truth that would soon come to light, that no matter the queen's cunning, the spirit of the princess was untouchable, and the kingdom itself would bear witness to the consequences of such jealousy. As Lady Morwen's plans matured, the tension between light and shadow within the palace reached a near breaking point. Seraphine, blissfully unaware, continued to embody hope and kindness, while Morwen, consumed by envy, readied the instruments of betrayal. The citizens outside the palace remained oblivious, going about their lives under the golden sun, while the halls within concealed a storm brewing, one that would erupt in fire and shadow. And though all seemed calm on the surface, the kingdom of Solara had begun its descent into a tale of treachery and reckoning, where envy would clash with innocence, and fire would awaken forces neither mortal nor magical could contain. Thus, the threads of fate entwined themselves tightly around Solara. The queen's shadow stretched across the throne, the king's heart wavered under false fears, and the palace seemed to hold its breath. Every flicker of flame from the torches, every whisper of wind through the corridors, hinted that the balance of power was about to shift. The kingdom's golden light now carried a subtle undertone of dread, for the princess's life teetered on the edge of peril. Yet even in the darkest of schemes there remained a promise. Fire, though it could consume flesh, could never snuff out the truth and the spirit of Seraphine. The day had arrived that the kingdom would long remember, a day that would sear itself into the memories of all who witnessed it. The skies above Solara were painted in shades of crimson and gold, as though the heavens themselves mirrored the impending tragedy. The sun, beginning its descent toward the horizon, cast long fiery streaks across the palace and the gathered citizens. Banners fluttered in the wind, the colors vibrant yet somber, a stark contrast to the tension that clutched the hearts of those assembled. Market squares, courtyards, and terraces were packed with onlookers, all murmuring, speculating, and waiting. For the first time in generations, the kingdom's entire populace would bear witness to an event that would define their era: the execution of Princess Seraphine. The princess herself was calm, exuding an inner serenity that contrasted sharply with the chaos surrounding her. Her hands were bound with fine braided ropes, yet she stood upright, her chin raised, and her eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun slowly burned its way toward the west. The light caressed her features, highlighting her golden hair, the contours of her determined face, and the quiet strength that radiated from her every movement. Despite the treachery that had led her to this moment, Seraphine carried herself with dignity, a beacon of resilience in the face of mortal peril. Children in the crowd pressed closer to their parents, sensing something extraordinary, though they could not fully understand why their beloved princess seemed so luminous, almost otherworldly. Lady Morwen, in contrast, glided through the gathered courtiers with a different energy altogether. Her eyes were sharp, her jaw set in a brittle smile, and every gesture carefully crafted to display authority and control. She had orchestrated this moment with meticulous planning, convincing the king and the council that Seraphine's presence threatened the stability of Solara. Yet even in her triumph, an uneasy shiver ran through her. Some instinct whispered that the palace itself disapproved, that the walls, long silent witnesses to countless injustices, remembered far more than any human could perceive. The air felt charged, a strange vibration that neither Morwen nor the crowd could articulate, as if the kingdom itself held its breath. The ceremonial pyre stood at the center of a vast square, constructed from the finest timbers and imbued with intricate carvings of the sun, symbolizing both life and sacrifice. Smoke from incense swirled in the gentle breeze, carrying scents of sandalwood, myrrh, and saffron. The priests and elders who officiated the proceedings wore solemn expressions, their chants a rhythmic blend of reverence and finality. As Seraphine was led forward, the crowd fell into a hushed anticipation. Whispers of hope, fear, and awe passed like currents through the assembly, the air vibrating with tension. Some whispered her name, uncertain whether to pray for her soul or to witness her downfall, while others avoided meeting her gaze, fearing the truth of her innocence might strike them with a pang of guilt for their compliance. Once positioned at the pyre, Seraphine's calmness intensified the spectacle. She did not struggle, nor did she plead. Instead, she lifted her gaze to the sky, watching the last rays of the sun ignite the clouds in brilliant streaks of red, amber, and gold. The light caught her eyes, illuminating them in a way that made them seem almost aflame with the energy of her spirit. Around her, the ropes that bound her wrists seemed insignificant, trivial against the force of her presence. Her lips parted slightly as if whispering words unheard by the crowd, and a strange hush fell over the onlookers, as if even the wind had paused to listen. Lady Morwen approached the pyre, her steps confident yet brittle, as though each footfall carried the weight of both triumph and unspoken dread. She raised her hand to signal the igniting of the flames, and the priests began their final incantations. As fire leapt from torches to timber, it spread quickly, crackling and hissing, the flames reaching skyward with a hunger that mirrored the passions of those gathered. Yet when they touched Seraphine, she did not flinch. Instead, her calm gaze held steady, unbroken by the inferno surrounding her. The crowd gasped, some stepping back in awe, others murmuring prayers under their breath. It was as though the flames themselves recognized a power they could not consume, a purity that remained untouched by mortal malice. The sun continued its descent, sending golden streaks over the pyre, painting the smoke in hues of rose and amber. Every movement, every flicker of the fire, seemed choreographed in divine symmetry with the princess's serene posture. Even Lady Morwen felt a pang of unease, a prickling at the back of her mind that this was not the end she had anticipated. Shadows twisted unnaturally around the pyre, and the temperature of the air seemed to shift, a subtle hum vibrating through the stones beneath the crowd's feet. The palace itself, silent witness to centuries of human ambition and cruelty, seemed to pulse in resonance with the fire, acknowledging Seraphine not as a victim, but as a force far greater than any one queen's schemes. As the flames licked higher, the princess's calm defiance became a story etched into the memory of every observer. Her eyes, reflecting both the burning timber and the crimson sunset, seemed to hold the wisdom of generations, the purity of heart, and the promise of justice. The crowd, initially swayed by Lady Morwen's manipulation, now felt the tide of their belief shift, a quiet awakening stirring in the hearts of those who had come to witness what they assumed was an end. Mothers whispered to their children to look, to remember, and to understand that the light of virtue could not be dimmed by the shadows of envy. The final moments of the sunset bathed the pyre in a cascade of molten gold and crimson red, and in that moment, the air thickened with anticipation, as if the very universe waited. The fire, though fierce, did not consume Seraphine entirely. Instead, the flames seemed to dance around her, molding her into a figure of incandescent energy. Her calm defiance transformed into a tangible presence, one that seemed to expand beyond the boundaries of flesh and timber, touching the hearts of those who had once doubted her. Lady Morwen stepped back, her confidence faltering, sensing a power she could not understand nor control, a force that would soon demand retribution and recognition. By the time the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, leaving the kingdom in the dim glow of dusk, the princess stood within the pyre unscathed in spirit. The last rays had illuminated her face, carved into the minds of every observer as a symbol of unwavering resolve and eternal light. What had been intended as an execution had instead become a revelation, that Seraphine's essence, her spirit and her righteousness, was beyond mortal harm. The kingdom of Solara had witnessed not an end, but the beginning of a tale written in fire, vengeance, and the inexorable power of a just soul. As the last rays of the sun vanished behind the distant horizon, the kingdom of Solara sank into a hush deeper than any ordinary night. The ceremonial pyre, once ablaze with furious orange and gold flames, now smoldered, leaving only a bed of glowing embers and curling smoke. The crowd, uncertain whether to mourn or flee, stood frozen, the whispers of awe and fear intertwining like the thin tendrils of mist that began to rise from the pyre. What had been intended as the end of Princess Seraphine's life had become something far stranger, something no mortal mind could easily comprehend. From the remnants of fire and ash, a faint light shimmered, ethereal and impossible. It pulsed like a heartbeat, subtle at first, yet growing stronger, drawing the gaze of all present. A hush fell over the assembled courtiers, soldiers and citizens alike. The air, thick with smoke and the lingering scent of burnt timber, seemed to shift and tremble. It was as if the very atmosphere recognized the anomaly, the defiance of death, the spirit of a princess who would not be silenced by mortal cruelty. Lady Morwen's smile faltered, her sharp eyes narrowing as an icy shiver ran down her spine. She had orchestrated this execution with every calculated move, yet the power that now emerged from the pyre was beyond her understanding, beyond her control. The light gathered, swirling and coalescing into a figure. Shadows danced around it, bending and folding in ways that defied the natural order. When the mist parted, the figure's face was unmistakable. It was Seraphine. Yet she was transformed. Her visage glimmered with a silver luminescence, reflecting the moonlight even though the moon itself had only just begun its ascent. Her eyes, once soft and human, now glowed faintly like twin stars, radiating both an unyielding resolve and a quiet, terrifying authority. The robes she wore seemed woven from night itself, fluid, ever-shifting, dotted with pinpricks of starlight that traced constellations unknown to the kingdom below. As Seraphine rose fully from the ashes, a hushed gasp ran through the crowd. The very ground beneath the pyre seemed to hum in resonance with her presence. Embers swirled around her like protective fireflies, tracing intricate patterns that told stories of her life, her kindness, her unjust suffering. Birds that had earlier fled in terror now circled high above, drawn to the radiant force emanating from the princess, their wings stirring the night air as if announcing a new dawn even in darkness. The palace walls seemed to lean closer, their ancient stones groaning with recognition, as though the memories of countless injustices and loyal acts had awakened to witness the return of their rightful heir. Lady Morwen stumbled backward, her carefully maintained composure crumbling. Her breaths came fast and shallow, each exhale trembling with disbelief and fear. "What sorcery is this?" she whispered, but even the words felt fragile against the powerful aura now radiating from the pyre. She could no longer discern where Seraphine ended and the night began. The two had merged seamlessly, creating a spectral presence that commanded awe and obedience. Every reflection in the nearby mirrors and polished armor surfaces seemed to bend toward her, capturing not only her image but the very essence of her indignation, her courage and her claim to justice. The citizens, unsure whether to flee or kneel, felt their hearts pulled by a force beyond mortal reasoning. Some fell to their knees instinctively, as though recognizing the return of a sovereign they had loved and mourned. Others remained rigid, frozen by a mix of fear and fascination, unable to turn away from the impossible sight before them. Whispers spread quickly, carrying both wonder and dread. "She lives, she is the night itself," murmured one elder, clutching her shawl. "The princess has returned," breathed another, unable to contain her awe. Every word seemed to reach Seraphine, carried on currents of magic that twined around the crowd like invisible threads of understanding. Her emergence was not merely symbolic, it was a declaration. With each step she took above the glowing embers, the shadows of the palace shifted, stretching toward her and away from Lady Morwen. The oppressive weight of envy and ambition that had hung in the air began to dissolve, leaving a palpable clarity, as if the kingdom itself was exhaling after a long stifled hold of breath. The night had become her cloak, the moonlight her crown, and the ashes from which she had risen her throne. She was no longer merely the princess who had suffered at the hands of a jealous stepmother, she was an elemental force, a living embodiment of justice and rightful authority. Seraphine's eyes scanned the gathered crowd, settling finally on Lady Morwen. The queen's beauty, once commanding, now seemed hollow, its allure unable to mask the corruption beneath. Morwen's whispered threats and schemes were impotent before the merging of spirit, night and will. Seraphine did not speak at first. Her silence carried more weight than any declaration. It was a silence that reverberated through the palace, through the assembled witnesses, and even through the distant mountains and forests. It carried the promise that injustice, no matter how cleverly concealed, would never remain unchallenged, and that the rightful heir would rise to claim what was hers. As the moon climbed higher, its silver light intertwining with the glow of the ashes, Seraphine took a deliberate step forward. The shadows bent and shifted, forming a natural path to the palace gates and the throne beyond. With each movement, her presence reshaped the world around her. Torches flickered to life with spectral fire, banners swayed though no wind moved them, and the murmurs of the citizens grew into a coherent chorus of reverence. Even the very stones of the palace seemed to hum, acknowledging the return of a ruler who had been wronged yet was unbowed. By the time night fully embraced Solara, the transformation was complete. Seraphine no longer belonged to the realm of the living alone. She was the knight incarnate, the keeper of justice, the avenger cloaked in shadow and moonlight. Her return was not merely to witness or to haunt, it was to act, to reclaim her throne, and to ensure that the balance of power, disrupted by envy and deceit, was restored. Lady Morwen, realizing the immensity of the force she had awakened, could only stand frozen, powerless, and awaiting the reckoning that was inevitable. The kingdom, once bathed in the warmth of a crimson sunset, now thrummed with an ethereal energy. Fire, darkness, and moonlight intertwined around Seraphine, declaring to all that she had risen from death not merely to return, but to rule. The whispers of the people, the murmurs of the palace stones, and the very breath of the night all spoke a singular truth. The princess had come back, wearing her own face, yet transformed into something far greater, and her throne awaited her. The palace of Solara, once a monument to wealth and order, now seemed to tremble under an invisible weight. The corridors, long echoing with the quiet footfalls of servants and guards, were filled with something far stranger than ordinary silence. Shadows flickered along the marble floors, curling and stretching unnaturally as if alive. In these shifting veils of darkness, Seraphine moved, no longer flesh and blood in the way of mortals, but a force of night and vengeance that commanded the air itself. Her presence was a whisper, a ripple through reality, unseen yet felt by every soul who had allowed envy, cruelty, or corruption to thrive within these walls. Lady Morwen, seated in her chamber with a veneer of control, felt the first prickle of unease as the evening deepened. Candles flickered though no breeze entered the room, and the silken drapes moved as if brushed by unseen fingers. A mirror across the room reflected not her own pale, anxious face, but a darkened semblance of the princess, staring with luminous eyes that pierced her very thoughts. Morwen's laughter, brittle and nervous, faltered. "It's nothing, just the wind," she whispered, though even as she spoke, the shadows in the corners seemed to curl closer, listening, breathing, waiting. Through the palace, Seraphine's influence spread. In the great hall, the counselors who had signed away justice for comfort or fear suddenly felt a chill creep up their spines. The ink on ledgers trembled, spilling faint crimson streaks across parchment that seemed impossible, forming words they had never written but could understand. Truth sees all. Guards felt the weight of invisible hands guiding them, causing them to stumble, to drop their weapons, to freeze mid-step as if caught in the gaze of the night itself. Servants fainted, some in terror, some in awe, all witnesses to the presence that could neither be fully seen nor ignored. The night whispered secrets that had long been hidden. In whispered echoes, the voices of those complicit in deceit, theft, or betrayal filled the halls. She knows, came the breathless murmurs of men who had pocketed bribes. We lied, we silenced, trembled the whispers from women who had spread rumors to protect themselves or curry favor. Each revelation was a ghostly chorus, woven with Seraphine's own voice, carrying not anger alone, but a stern insistence that truth must be acknowledged. Those who had thought themselves safe behind masks of etiquette or loyalty realized that every action, every deceit, had been catalogued in the memories of the palace, in its walls, in its stones. Lady Morwen attempted to regain control, her fingers clutching at her chair, her voice rising in panic. She called for her servants, demanding light, order, and explanation. But the palace would not obey her. Doors slammed silently, trapping some rooms while opening others to empty corridors. Chandeliers swayed without wind, casting moving shadows that morphed into fleeting faces, faces of those who had suffered, who had watched silently as injustice unfolded. In one corner, a tapestry fluttered though the air was still. It depicted Seraphine as a young child, innocent and radiant, and the threads of her image seemed to shimmer, eyes glinting as if alive. Morwen turned away, heart hammering, but the images and whispers followed her, guiding her through a maze of truths she could no longer deny. In the chambers where Morwen had conspired with corrupt officials, the whispers took form in other ways. Candles extinguished, leaving only the ghostly glow of the princess to illuminate her message. Papers rearranged themselves to expose lies, contracts, and decrees signed in secret to enrich the guilty or punish the innocent. Morwen's own reflection in the mirrors twisted, revealing the cracks in her soul that she had hidden behind beauty and ambition. Each step she took was tracked by the bending shadows, each breath followed by a whisper, each heartbeat echoed in the rhythm of the palace's acknowledgement of her guilt. Beyond Morwen's chambers, Seraphine moved through the servants' quarters, whispering reassurances to those who had remained loyal. Her voice, soft as the rustle of silk and leaves in the night, reminded them of their courage, of the deeds they had performed in the face of fear. Through her whispers, walls and doors, she instructed them, "Do not tremble, do not conceal the truth, for the night will protect those who act with justice." Servants, once paralyzed by dread, felt a resurgence of bravery, moving with quiet determination to secure what was right, guided by the invisible hand of the princess who now roamed unseen. The halls themselves seemed to awaken, responding to Seraphine's presence. Marble steps hummed under her passage, resonating with the heartbeat of the kingdom. Paintings tilted subtly, as if leaning closer to hear or reflect her guidance. The tapestries along the corridors fluttered and shimmered as though alive, revealing hidden images that told stories of oppression, kindness, and the resilience of the innocent. Even the stone statues, frozen in eternal watch, seemed to lean forward slightly, acknowledging her authority, the legitimacy of her vengeance, and the inevitability of her reclamation. Lady Morwen's fear escalated to desperation. She stumbled into the grand hall, calling for guards, waving her hands and issuing frantic orders. But every movement she made was anticipated by the shadows, by the whispers, by the intangible force that now embodied Seraphine's will. Objects moved subtly, tripping the unwary, slamming doors behind her as though closing in on her own guilt. Servants who had once feared her now witnessed her terror and began whispering amongst themselves, the spell of fear breaking as the truth became undeniable. By midnight the palace had transformed. The corridors were no longer mere stone and wood, they were conduits for justice. Every whisper of fabric, every creak of floorboards, and every flicker of candlelight carried the presence of the night, a spectral Seraphine whose authority transcended the mortal plane. Morwen, isolated in her chamber, felt the full weight of her misdeeds, her power crumbling under the gaze of one who had transcended death itself. As the hours passed, the night did not merely haunt, it instructed, guided, and prepared. Those complicit, confronted with undeniable truth, began to falter, revealing hidden corruption. The innocent, touched by Seraphine's whispers, found courage to speak, to act, and to reclaim the integrity of the palace. Solara itself seemed to breathe with newfound balance, aware that the rightful heir, though no longer confined to mortal limits, was asserting her claim, and that every secret, every betrayal, and every act of injustice would be brought into the light, or the shadows as justice now preferred. By dawn, even the first bird songs carried a subtle tremor of reverence. The whispers of the night had laid the foundation for Seraphine's reclamation, a network of truth, vigilance, and spectral power woven invisibly through the palace. Morwen's panic-stricken face, the trembling servants, the rearranged halls, and the shadows themselves all attested to a single, unavoidable truth. The princess had returned, and her power was no longer limited by the boundaries of flesh. The night was her cloak, the palace her instrument, and justice, silent yet relentless, would follow her wherever she walked. The kingdom of Solara, once bustling with routine and rigid hierarchies, now trembled under an invisible tension that no crown or decree could control. From the moment Seraphine's spirit had merged with the night, her presence, silent, unseen, and absolute, had begun to ripple through every hall, corridor, and chamber of the palace. Lady Morwen, who had once ruled with subtle cruelty and whispered threats, now felt the first cracks of her dominion. Courtiers, guards, and officials moved with a new, tentative caution, glancing over their shoulders, uncertain if the shadows themselves carried the will of the Night Princess. The air was thick with anticipation and dread, as though the entire palace awaited a judgment that had already begun but had yet to reveal its full force. Morwen's once commanding voice, sharp and biting, faltered more frequently each day. Orders she issued were met with subtle resistance. A guard delayed, a clerk misfiled an important document, a servant forgot to relay messages. At first, these were easily dismissed as minor errors, but patterns began to emerge that even the cunning queen could not ignore. The very walls of the palace seemed to breathe, their surfaces whispering truths that reached only the ears of those with guilt to hide. Portraits of past rulers appeared to watch her with silent accusation, and mirrors no longer reflected solely her image, They flickered, briefly showing Seraphine's luminous visage behind her, a reminder that the rightful princess was no longer confined to mortal bounds. Within the court, rumors began to spread like wildfire. Nobles who had previously pledged loyalty to Morwen whispered among themselves in darkened corners, their voices trembling. "The night princess walks unseen," one murmured, voice barely audible over the rustle of fine gowns. "She sees everything, knows all," another added, fear and awe entwined in the words. Guards exchanged wary glances, some clutching their swords more tightly than necessary, as though the weight of justice itself had taken form and might strike at any moment. Even servants who had learned the rhythms of palace life began to feel the hum of an unseen power guiding or warning them. Each whisper, each shadow, each sudden chill was interpreted as a sign of Seraphine's growing dominion. The night princess did not act recklessly. Her power was not brute force but the art of subtlety. She tested the boundaries of her influence carefully, manipulating events to expose lies and corruption without revealing her full presence. A bribe meant to secure Morwen's loyalty might vanish, its coin appearing in a place that implicated the giver rather than the intended victim. Miscommunications between conspirators became apparent, causing them to question their own judgment and sowing seeds of paranoia. Servants who had previously turned blind eyes to injustices now found themselves compelled to speak the truth, guided by the gentle insistence of whispers that felt like both wind and song. Through these actions the palace began to shift. Morwen, once confident in her scheming, found her control slipping like sand through her fingers. Every corner she turned revealed subtle signs that her authority was being undermined, often by forces she could neither see nor comprehend. The night itself seemed to favor Seraphine, shadows coiling around Morwen as if to mark her misdeeds for all to witness, while light and warmth gravitated toward those who acted justly. Courtiers who had prospered by flattery or treachery now found themselves exposed, their lies unraveling in the quiet moments between whispers and candlelight. Among the people, the aura of Seraphine's return began to inspire hope. Though most could not see her, they sensed her presence. Farmers visiting the palace to pay tribute or present grievances felt a weight lifted from their shoulders, an unspoken assurance that injustice would not go unanswered. Merchants and craftsmen noticed subtle changes in how palace decrees were enforced, decisions skewed toward fairness, accountability becoming unavoidable. Even the city itself seemed to respond. Breezes carried the faint scent of blooming night flowers, the streets echoed with whispers of the night princess, and animals, once shy, approached without fear, drawn by her gentle but firm energy. Morwen's paranoia intensified. She paced her private chambers at all hours, checking mirrors, doors and windows for signs of intrusion. Yet every precaution proved insufficient. Servants who once feared her openly defied her commands in small but telling ways. Important documents went missing or were rearranged, letters meant to discredit loyal officials returned unopened or altered. Whispers followed her, recounting every deceit she had perpetrated, each subtle act of cruelty magnified and repeated until her mind teetered on the edge of hysteria. She had attempted to manipulate the night and the court with fear, but the night princess had turned the very essence of darkness into a tool of justice, rendering her schemes impotent. Even the king's household began to notice these strange occurrences. The guards reported objects moving without cause, doors locking and unlocking on their own, and sudden gusts of wind swirling through empty corridors. Officials who had previously maintained their allegiance to Morwen could no longer ignore the subtle corrections guiding their actions. A letter misfiled deliberately to protect a corrupt minister would be discovered in a location that exposed the truth, a stolen item returned to its rightful owner with no explanation. The court's internal balance shifted incrementally but inexorably, tilting toward justice as the night princess's presence silently but powerfully asserted itself. Through all of this, Seraphine maintained a careful balance. She did not seek vengeance for its own sake, rather she sought to restore order and illuminate the truth. Her whispers reminded those who had acted rightly to remain steadfast, while subtly nudging wrongdoers to reveal themselves. Every subtle gust of wind, every flicker of candlelight, every shiver of a tapestry was imbued with her purpose. The palace itself became her instrument, an extension of her will that revealed corruption without unnecessary bloodshed, enforcing accountability with precision and grace. By the end of the night, the court was gripped with a mixture of awe, fear, and reverence. Morwen's once iron grip had loosened completely. Her authority was questioned openly, her conspiracies unraveling before eyes that could not yet see the princess directly. The nobles and guards whispered of the night princess, their voices filled with respect and trepidation. They began to understand that the presence moving unseen among them was not a mere phantom seeking revenge, but a guiding force of justice, an unseen hand that protected the innocent and exposed the guilty. For the people of Solara, this marked the first time in many years that they sensed hope intertwined with power. They understood, in instinctive ways, that the Night Princess moved not to punish without cause, but to ensure that right prevailed where wrong had taken root. The shadows carried her wisdom, the walls recorded her guidance, and every whisper that passed from mouth to ear reminded the kingdom that justice, tempered with care, would always find its way, even through darkness. The night air within the grand palace of Solara was thick with tension and anticipation. Moonlight spilled through tall, arched windows, casting elongated silver shadows that danced across polished marble floors. The council chamber, where nobles and ministers gathered for deliberation, had never felt so oppressive. Every voice that attempted to speak faltered under the weight of a presence no one could yet see, a presence that had silently guided, corrected, and exposed corruption across the kingdom for weeks. Now, in the heart of this most sacred chamber, that presence would finally make itself known. Seraphine, the Night Princess, was ready to confront the source of all her suffering and reveal the truth to all who would hear it. As the counselors murmured nervously among themselves, a cold wind swept through the chamber. The candles lining the walls flickered violently, though no door or window had been opened. Murmurs of unease rippled through the gathered crowd. Some glanced at each other, confusion evident on their faces. Others instinctively reached for swords or daggers, though they knew not what threat could be present. Then came a sound, a soft, melodic whisper, impossible to locate, yet undeniably calling their attention. The voice carried the tone of the princess, calm yet authoritative, firm yet compassionate, echoing through the chamber in whispers that gradually grew louder. Justice cannot be silenced. The truth cannot be hidden. All that is unjust shall be revealed. At that instant, the mirrors along the chamber walls reacted violently. Glass rippled as if water had replaced it, and then, one by one, the reflective surfaces shattered. Shards fell to the ground with deafening crashes, scattering across the marble floor, revealing distorted images of those present. Nobles caught in acts of deceit, ministers hiding stolen treasures, and servants whose loyalty had faltered under pressure. Every reflection showed the true nature of the viewer, exposing not only sins but hidden intentions. Murmurs of shock and fear erupted, and some members of the court stumbled backward, their eyes wide with horror at the undeniable revelations. Doors along the chamber slammed shut simultaneously, echoing like gunfire in the enclosed space. The sound reverberated, shaking the very foundations of the council hall. Shadows along the walls began to twist unnaturally, forming shapes and figures that resembled past victims of corruption, innocent faces who had suffered under lies and manipulation. These shadows moved with deliberate purpose, swirling around the chamber, guiding the eyes of the onlookers toward the source of the unrest, the truth. The atmosphere became electric, charged with an energy both frightening and awe-inspiring, as if the palace itself had awakened to bear witness to the unfolding justice. Lady Morwen, perched in her elevated seat at the head of the council, felt the first tendrils of real fear coil around her heart. She had spent years weaving a web of manipulation, controlling the council, the court, and even the king himself. Yet now, confronted by the invisible but undeniable power of the Night Princess, her carefully constructed dominance began to crumble. Her hands trembled as she reached for a ceremonial staff, seeking authority in the object, but it felt suddenly alien in her grip, heavy and cold, as if rejecting her claim to power. The whispers grew louder, taking on a sharper, more precise cadence. You hid the truth. You betrayed the kingdom. You silenced the innocent. The words reverberated through the room, wrapping around Morwen and every noble complicit in her schemes. The chamber seemed to pulse in rhythm with the voice, the marble floors vibrating subtly under the collective weight of the revelation. Servants who had once feared punishment now felt a strange courage swell within them, their eyes meeting one another as they realized that they were witnesses to a reckoning centuries in the making. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the deepest shadows of the chamber, moving with the fluid grace of someone who commanded not only space but the very essence of night itself. The figure's face was unmistakable. Seraphine, the princess thought lost to the flames, now returned in a form that blended mortal beauty with the ethereal power of darkness and moonlight. Her eyes glowed softly, reflecting the broken shards of mirrors and the flickering candlelight, radiating authority, sorrow, and an unyielding demand for justice. The courtiers gasped collectively, some fell to their knees in awe, others staggered back, fear overtaking their rational minds. Lady Morwen's face paled, her lips moving silently in an attempt to deny the impossible truth. As Seraphine approached, shadows and broken glass moved with her, forming a pathway that separated her from the rest of the council. Each step she took was deliberate, measured, yet resonant with the weight of inevitability. She raised her hand slightly, and the room fell into an uncanny silence. Even the wind seemed to pause, the world itself bending to witness this moment of confrontation. Morwen, in a desperate act of defiance, rose from her seat, eyes darting to every possible escape route. Yet every door, every corridor, every window was now under the influence of the Night Princess. She could not flee, nor could she hide from the truth that had come to claim acknowledgement. Seraphine's voice, now clear and commanding, filled the chamber. You thought the shadows would protect you, Morwen? You thought silence could shield your lies. But the palace remembers every act of cruelty, every stolen moment of justice. You cannot escape the truth. The walls themselves seemed to vibrate with the weight of her declaration, reinforcing every word with a resonant power that no mortal voice could replicate. The counselor's eyes widened as shadows of past misdeeds animated themselves, pointing out the precise transgressions of those who had colluded with Morwen. Evidence of deceit was no longer hidden. It was made manifest by the combined will of the Night Princess and the awakened palace. Morwen's composure shattered entirely. Her voice trembled as she stammered denials, but the evidence, mirrored in both shadows and whispers, rendered her protest futile. The palace, alive and vigilant, seemed to lean forward as if urging Seraphine to deliver the final truth. She did not shout, did not strike. Her presence alone was sufficient. Every noble and servant present felt the weight of accountability pressing down, and a collective realization settled. The throne, the kingdom, and the court itself recognized her as the rightful arbiter of justice. In a final act of inevitability, Seraphine stepped close to Morwen, and the shadows converged to encircle the fallen queen. The Night Princess's eyes, glowing with calm authority, met Morwen's with unwavering certainty. Acknowledge your deeds, she commanded softly, yet with a force that echoed through both body and spirit. Morwen, trembling, could not deny the truth any longer. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, admitting the crimes that had defined her rise to power, acknowledging every betrayal, every act of envy, every moment she had tried to silence the rightful heir. Alone but with the undeniable.